Tommy Lynn Sells, also known as the Coast to Coast Killer or the Cross Country Killer, was an American serial killer. Although he was only convicted of 2 murders, it is suspected that he was responsible for at least 20 others. Tommy himself claims to have murdered up to 50 people over his 3-decade-long life on the road. This is his story. Tommy Lynn Sells was born in Oakland, California on June 28, 1964. He had a twin sister, Tammy Jean Sells. Their mother, Nina, had 2 sons before the twins, and 3 more boys followed after. There's suspicion surrounding who Tommy's father was. On paper, William Sells, who was an insurance agent, was the father, but there are reports of his father actually being a used car salesman named Joe Lovins. Nina decides to move her family from Oakland to St. Louis, where she had family. It was here, when they were 18 months old, the twins contracted meningitis. Tommy luckily survived, but sadly, Tammy passed away due to the illness. Soon after this, Tommy was sent to live with his aunt, Bonnie Walpole, in Holcomb, Missouri. He lived with Bonnie from the ages of 2 to 5 before Nina got him to come back home. This was reportedly due to her hearing that Tommy's aunt wanted to adopt him. Bonnie claimed Nina had no interest in the boy and hardly ever visited him. Many have described Tommy as a throwaway child, as is often the case with serial killers. Tommy had a terrible upbringing. He began drinking at the age of 7 when Nina allowed him to sample alcohol with his grandfather. When he was 8, Tommy began spending time around a man by the name of Willis Clark in a nearby town. Willis spoiled Tommy with gifts and outings, and soon Tommy began spending the night at Willis's home frequently. It would be discovered years later that Willis Clark was responsible for molesting multiple young boys, including Tommy. At 10 years old, Tommy started to smoke marijuana and dropped out of school. At the age of 13, Tommy did something very disturbing. He stripped down to nothing but his socks and climbed into bed with his grandmother. This led to him being banned from her house. Some reports say that Tommy's family abandoned him a year later and left town. Regardless, whether they left him behind or he went out on his own, Tommy was now just 14 years old and homeless and alone. From 1978 to 1999, Tommy Lynn Sells hitchhiked and train hopped across the United States, doing what he needed to do to survive and leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. In 1981, Tommy had a brief reunion with his family when he met up with them in Little Rock, Arkansas. This didn't last long though, as Tommy attempted to get in the shower with his mother and he was kicked out. This incident led to Tommy receiving a mental examination, but after failing to receive help at the clinic, Tommy's drinking intensified. His first arrest would come in 1982 for public drunkenness. September 1984 rolled around and Tommy had landed himself back in jail, this time for driving under the influence and crashing his car. He was in jail until May 16, 1986. He then made his way to Aronson's Pass in Texas, where he was hospitalized after overdosing on heroin. Once he had recovered, Tommy was on the road again, heading to Fremont, California. Police investigators would later link him to the murder of 20-year-old Jennifer Dewey, who had been shot. They also suspect Tommy was responsible for the murder of 19-year-old Michelle Xavier, who was found dead after her throat had been cut. In July 1985, Tommy, who was 21 years old at the time, was working at a carnival in Missouri. It was here where he met 28-year-old divorcee Anna Court. She had attended the carnival with her 4-year-old son, Rory. Anna apparently invited Tommy over to her house that evening, and the two had consensual sex. Tommy then fell asleep, and when he woke up, he found the woman stealing from his bag. This angered Tommy, so he grabbed a nearby wooden baseball bat and beat Anna to death. Then Tommy did the same to young Rory, as to not leave a witness. The bodies were discovered in Anna's home 3 days later, but by then, Tommy was long gone. 2 years later, he ended up in Winnemucca, Nevada, living with 20-year-old Stephanie Stroh. Tommy later confessed to drugging her before strangling her to death. He claims to have tied cement blocks to her feet and disposed of her body in a desert spring. This confession couldn't be confirmed. Tommy spent his life on the road, working as a barber, mechanic, or general laborer. An accurate tally of all the crimes he committed is simply not possible. Even Tommy himself surely couldn't keep track. In 1990, Tommy stole a truck in Wyoming and ended up getting a 16-month prison sentence for this. Here, he was diagnosed with a host of mental disorders. Psychologists believe Tommy had a personality disorder that had aspects of antisocial, borderline, and schizoid attributes. Added to this was bipolar disorder, depressive disorder, and psychosis. In 1992, on May 13th in Charleston, West Virginia, a young woman, Fabian Witherspoon, spotted Tommy under a bridge with a sign saying, "I will work for food." Feeling sorry for him, Fabian invited him back home with her, but asked him to wait outside. She closed the door and went to her kitchen to grab him something to eat. By the time she was done and had turned around, Tommy had entered her house. Tommy grabbed a knife from her kitchen and caught her in the bathroom. He would end up sexually assaulting her multiple times. She attempted to fight him off and hit him over the head with a ceramic figurine. This made Tommy angry, so he beat Fabian with a piano stool. She luckily survived despite being stabbed 18 times by Tommy with the kitchen knife. Fabian said the following regarding the attack: "I saw him under the underpass. Of course, me being an Air Force brat, I'd never seen a homeless person. He didn't look scary, he looked approachable, like I felt sorry for him." When reliving what had happened, Fabian said, "I felt really stupid, very embarrassed. I just wanted to hide." For his crime, Tommy was indicted on 5 counts of rape and felony assault in September of that year. He took a plea deal and instead was charged with malicious wounding. He was sentenced on June 25, 1993. And given 2 to 10 years in prison. This time, while in prison, Tommy was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He also married Nora Price while incarcerated. After serving 4 years, Tommy was released and left West Virginia for Tennessee with his new wife. Their relationship didn't last long, however, and Tommy soon left her and resumed his life on the road. Considering what she would have later found out about Tommy's exploits, Nora Price could count herself lucky. Authorities believe Tommy Lynn Sells murdered at least 22 people. A retired Texas Ranger, John Allen, was quoted saying, "We did confirm 22. I know there's more. I know there's a lot more. Obviously, we won't ever know." Tommy claims the first murder he committed was when he was 15 years old. He said he broke into a man's house to steal something and instead found the man sexually assaulting a young boy, which led to Tommy killing the man in a blind rage. The story could never be confirmed. The following is a list of other crimes that Tommy Lynn Sells has been linked to. The murder of Suzanne Korch in May 1987 in New York. The murders of the Dardine family on November 17, 1987 in Illinois. The murder of Melissa Tremblay on September 11, 1988 in Massachusetts. The 1989 murder of a co-worker in Texas. The murder of 10-year-old Joel Kirkpatrick on October 13, 1997 in Illinois. The murder of Stephanie Mahaney on October 15, 1997 in Springfield, Missouri. The April 18, 1999 murder of May Beatrice Perez, who was just 9 years old at the time, in San Antonio, Texas. He was ultimately convicted of her murder. The sexual assault and murder of Haley McCone on May 23, 1999 in Lexington, Kentucky. The murder that he would eventually be convicted of was the sexual assault and murder of Kayleen Jo Harris on December 31, 1999. Terry and Crystal Harris lived in a trailer home near San Antonio with their 2 daughters and son. It was while attending Grace Community Church that they made contact with Tommy and his wife. Tommy visited the family's home multiple times, under the guise of asking Terry for marriage counseling. On that New Year's Eve, 1999, Terry assisted a friend of theirs with moving belongings to Texas. This meant that Crystal, their children, and the Searles children were left at home. Tommy spent most of his evening at a local bar, but once it had closed, he headed over to the Harris residence. He accessed the home through an open window and found 13-year-old Kayleen Harris sleeping in the bottom bunk of her bed, with 10-year-old Crystal Searle sleeping in the top bunk. Tommy proceeded to put his hand over Kayleen's mouth and bring out a 12-inch hunting knife he had on him. He then cut off Kayleen's sleeping shorts and began to sexually assault her. Kayleen tried to fight him off and managed to pull free of Tommy, before standing up and screaming, "Go get mama." Tommy quickly turned the light on and blocked the door, now realizing there was a second girl in the room. He then moved behind the young girl and put his hand over her mouth to keep her quiet, and sliced her throat twice. Kayleen collapsed and Tommy continued his attack, stabbing the girl 16 more times. He then turned his attention on Crystal. "I'll be quiet, I promise. I won't say anything," Crystal begged with Tommy, but he wasn't fazed. He reached over and sliced her throat. Crystal was badly injured but knew she needed to play dead so that Tommy wouldn't continue his attack. So that is what she did. Tommy then left the Harris home. Crystal believed everyone had been killed, so she ran to a neighbor's house to get help. It was a quarter-mile away, and Crystal had to hold her hand over her throat. Thankfully, Crystal survived and was able to identify Tommy. She also testified at the trial. Tommy was arrested on January 2, 2000. While on his way to the Valverde County Sheriff's Office, Tommy looked over to Lieutenant Larry Pope and remarked, "Well, I guess we've got a lot to talk about." While in custody, he confessed to the attack on the 2 girls, but this was only the beginning. Over the following months while in custody, Tommy confessed to murders littered across the United States from his 3 decades on the road. Regardless of the actual number of crimes committed, he was sentenced to death on September 20, 2000 for the murder of Kayleen Harris. Tommy went on to admit to killing the 4 members of the Dardine family. He wasn't charged with the murders as his account seemed to mainly feature popular known information that was all over the news. Some of the details he gave also seemed inaccurate, and his official account of how he met the family changed 3 times. Investigators in the case wanted to take Tommy back to the state where the crimes had been committed, but Texas refused. Since Tommy was on death row, he was not allowed to leave the state. He also admitted to killing Thomas Brose, a Carnival co-worker, in 1998. Thomas was found shot to death in his San Antonio motorhome, but that wasn't the only thing Tommy did in San Antonio. Tommy confessed to another murder, one that had police baffled and without any leads for years prior. In April of 1999, Mary Beatrice Perez was attending a fiesta event in Market Square, San Antonio. Mary B, as the 9-year-old was fondly known, was described as a bright young girl who loved to dance. She had briefly wandered from her parents before disappearing. She was later found strangled to death, her body only dressed in a white Mickey Mouse t-shirt and a single sock. Tommy went on to explain in explicit details how he kidnapped and murdered Mary B. He had been working at the fiesta for a carnival and had found a little girl in tears looking for her parents, with another worker called Red. Tommy said he and Red took Mary B to the edge of a creek behind the Union Stockyards, roughly 1.5 miles away from Market Square. He says they were both high on drugs at the time. There was a mattress lying close by, and he passed out on it. When he woke up, Tommy claimed Red was sexually assaulting Mary B, but he passed out again. He woke up to Red giving him oral sex, which resulted in a fight between the men. Red ran off, and Tommy was left alone with the crying girl. He says he then walked up to her and strangled her with his bare hands. Tommy pleaded guilty to her murder in Bexar County and was sentenced to life in prison in 2003, instead of a second death sentence. When he was asked why he did it, Tommy simply replied, "Dead man leaves no tales," followed by, "No witness, no problem." In 2004, Tommy confessed to breaking into the home of Julie Ree Harper, although he didn't know her name back then, on October 13, 1997, and stabbing her son to death with a knife from the kitchen block. Julie was initially convicted of the crime after her story about a masked intruder wasn't believed, but she was later acquitted. The start of his 86-page transcript referencing the crime read, "I followed the woman from the convenience store to a driveway she pulled into, and I hung around several hours, till it come wee hours of the morning. Then I went into this house. I go to the first bedroom I see. I don't know whose room it is, and I start stabbing." Matters were slightly complicated though, as Tommy wasn't completely sure it was Joel that he had killed. You all haven't asked this, but I will go ahead and tell you this. Do I think I'm the one that killed this kid? Yes. If it wasn't this kid I killed, then there's a murder out there that we still ain't undug yet. I went in and I don't know if it was her room. Don't know if it was his room. I don't. I just knew I wanted to go in there and hurt someone. On January 3rd, 2014, a judge set Tommy Lynn Sells' execution date for April 3rd, 2014. In the days leading up to his execution day, Tommy spent his time receiving visitors and talking to prison officials. His last meal was 3 pancakes, oatmeal, and applesauce. Tommy was put to death at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas, despite a last litigation by his attorneys wanting the U.S. Supreme Court intervene after prison officials refused to disclose necessary details of the lethal drugs. They argue that the increasing scarcity of execution drugs and consequent concerns about the quality and state's desperate efforts to keep the source of drugs secret have become the central feature of botched executions and Eighth Amendment concerns. The Searles, Harris, and Perez families attended. Tommy had no final words. The families watched on as Tommy was given a fatal dose of pentobarbital. He took a few deep breaths, began snoring, and finally went limp. He was pronounced dead at 6:27 p.m. Mary B's grandfather, John Torres, wasn't shy in sharing his feelings after the execution. "We all have suffered many years. It's payback time. I wanted to see him die," said Kayleen's brother, Sean Harris. "That's honest. I wanted to know that he could no longer hurt anybody." Over a year after his death, a woman came forward after watching an episode of Crime Watch Daily that featured Tommy. Her name was Melissa DeBoer, and she had been the victim of an attack on her and her mother in 1992, which left her mother dead. A man by the name of Rodney Lincoln had been convicted of this crime, but Melissa had a revelation. The wrong man was behind bars, and she was asking Missouri's governor to set him free. "I made a mistake, and I am heartbroken, and I have incredible guilt for my role," Melissa wrote in her application letter for a pardon to Democratic Governor Jay Nixon. Rodney Lincoln had been charged with capital murder, but had always maintained his innocence. Melissa began to question Rodney's guilt after watching a Crime Watch Daily episode, which mentioned Tommy Lee Sells' time in St. Louis, and questioned whether it could have been him who committed the crime. Melissa revealed her testimony at the trial had been rehearsed and that she says investigators had coaxed her into identifying Rodney as the man who killed her mother. The letter continued, "I am asking you to release Rodney Lincoln so that I may have peace. It is time for this tragedy to end." The Missouri Court of Appeals initially refused to rehear the matter, but thankfully in 2018, Missouri Governor Eric Greitens commuted Rodney's sentence. Tommy Lynn Sells is considered by many as the worst kind of serial killer, one who simply kills for the fun of it, or for reasons as simple as someone irritating him. He showed no mercy to any of his victims and derived pleasure from taking innocent lives. It is likely there are people whose names have never made the headline that fell victim to Tommy's murderous rampage. Undoubtedly, had he not been caught for the murder of Kayleen Harris, Tommy would have gone on to take the lives of countless others.